Welcome. This is a shorter yin yoga practice that consists of just 3 postures: saddle pose, frog pose, and dragonfly at the wall pose, with an emphasis on affecting the low back. Useful props will be wall space for dragonfly at the wall pose. Yoga bolster if you have one, but again, if you don't have a yoga bolster, then you can make do with whatever else you have around the house, like a couch cushion or pillows and blankets. Pressure points might be an issue, so have maybe a pillow or a couple blankets nearby just in case you need them. This brief practice will start with a lateral bend flow warm-up before we get into the 3 core yin postures. And so find a comfortable seat. It doesn't have to be seated like me, but if you can sit this the way I'm sitting, that's fine here. You need a little bit of space around you and a little bit of space to be able to create a neutral spine here. Sit up tall. And if you are sitting on the floor, then there's a few extra things that you can do during this lateral bend flow. So make a nice big sweeping circle, maybe on an inhale, to kind of emphasize expanding and growing your arms and your torso. This is to make your spine nice and neutral so that it can laterally bend here. And then take your one arm, and if you're on the floor, you can place your hand on the floor and reach up and over with your other arm and lengthen through. You're trying to keep your sits bones neutral here so that you can feel kind of a lengthened and a stretch. This is a yang exercise because it takes some muscle engagement to create the length, the opening, the stretching in this side. And then at some point, maybe on another inhale, bring yourself back up to center, and then maybe on an exhale, go over and kind of stretch out or lengthen through the other side. And then flow here for a while. So a few flows back and forth. It doesn't really matter how many you do. Keep breathing though. This is a yoga class, so notice how your breath moves as your body moves, and maybe your breath naturally syncs with your body, or maybe your body syncs with your breath, or maybe the answer is none of the above. Your breath is doing one thing, your body's doing another. You're just noticing. So maybe one more cycle on either side here, just to kind of loosen up and cultivate some inner ground before we get into the first long held posture, which is saddle pose here. So I'll go ahead and get ready for saddle pose. And saddle pose, I would generally say, is not a posture that probably everybody should start off a yin yoga practice with. But if you're familiar with saddle pose and you're pretty comfortable with it, you can settle right into it. Otherwise, if you're flinching at the idea of doing saddle pose right off the bat, there'll be an alternative, and the alternative is Sphinx at the Wall. So I'll demonstrate saddle pose here first, initially. So saddle pose starts off sitting back on or in between your heels. Now, if you're already flinching at this because you know this will generate pain either in your knees or in your ankles, then probably Sphinx at the Wall. You'll probably want to wait for Sphinx at the Wall. But if you're sitting comfortable like this, like I am, and again, I've got my heels on outside of my hips, but you can have your heels underneath, and you can have your knees out wide for saddle. Remember, this is yin, so you're creating your own version for saddle here. This is where a bolster comes in useful. So you can take a bolster, you can place it up narrow end at your low back just to have a little bit of height underneath you. Those of you with extreme range of motions, you probably don't need or even want the bolster. Some of us, the bolster is not enough, but for a few of us, maybe bolster is just enough here. So once we get here, the second idea is to then slowly lower ourselves back. We want to do this slowly so that we can notice the generation of sensation in our bodies, wherever it might be. Maybe it's in our low back. Most commonly, it's getting generated in the front of the thighs, and it might eventually go into the knees and create pain there. So we're trying to pay attention to notice those things here. But sooner or later, maybe you settle yourself down onto the floor or a bolster or a couple of bolsters. So here you are. And like I said, this is a yin sequence. So once you get settled at your edge, soften the muscle fibers, use your breath to do the softening, and then cultivate a sense of patience. Stay here for a while. So we'll try to stay for 4 minutes. Again, this is allowing and accepting practice, which means you don't have to stay here for 4 minutes. If you decide you're done with this after 2 minutes, then you can come out and rest or do something else or change your edge here. So that's the 3 principles kind of wrapped up into one little comment there here. So if this is not working, if you're in the saddle, you found your edge, you're kind of now just kind of residing for time, that's great. If you need something different, then I'll demonstrate Sphinx at the Wall for just an alternative. So for Sphinx at the Wall, you'll need a little bit of wall space and maybe a little bit of padding up against the wall space. Now for Sphinx at the Wall is like Sphinx pose, except we'll bend our knees and put our shins up against the wall. So notice that I'm on my hands and knees. I'm backing up to the wall to get my knees as close to the wall as possible here. So my shins are bent, my feet and shins are pointed up towards the wall here. And then I lower myself down onto my belly, bring my elbows underneath my shoulders, shoulder width apart, just like I do for regular Sphinx. So this is regular Sphinx, except my legs are bent. Now, knees up against the wall. I have padding underneath my knees and my legs just to make this a little bit more manageable here. And you can try just to stay here. You can hang your head, you can relax the muscles in your torso to let your spine sag, and let this posture just sink into the low back. And you might even, some of us, we might feel some pressure running through our front body, which is certainly the case for when we're doing a more intense pose like saddle pose here. So a nice alternative to try here. Otherwise, so stay there for a couple more minutes, or otherwise, if you're still residing in saddle, reside in saddle pose, check your breath, check your edge, see if you're still feeling anything. Now, if you're feeling not so much, maybe get rid of the bolster, go all the way down onto the floor, change your edge. Or if you're feeling too much, then maybe it's time to come out here. Otherwise, we have a little over a minute left in this posture here. So I was saying during the introduction that this is a sequence for the low back. And what you're going to find with a lot of these postures that we're doing is that most of the intensity, the severe intensity, is in our legs. Like saddle's a pretty good one. A lot of people typically feel saddle in the fronts of the thighs because the fronts of the thighs are so tight here. And so it kind of feels more like a sequence for the legs. It's like, wait a second, this is not a low back sequence, this is the leg sequence because I'm feeling this in my leg. And the answer is, to a certain extent, well, yes, that's true. For a lot of us, we're feeling, but remember, the connective tissue, well, a lot of just tissues that run through our body are continuous. They run from the tip of our toes up to the crown of our head. And there's a lot of tight tissues in our legs that are pulling on our pelvic bone and our low back, our hips and our low back. And so it's that tight tissue that actually can create a lot of tightness and achiness in the hips and in the low back area, which is often a main area of interest in sort of a typical yin practice here. So just one more breath here. And then if you're in Sphinx at the Wall, or if you're in saddle, time to come out. Slowly come out of saddle. Take your time and figure out how you come out of saddle. So you don't have to pop out of saddle. Maybe you don't know how, or maybe you just can't. So you can root your hands into the ground. To be honest with you, I like to root my forearms into the ground, grab my shins with my hands, and like pull with my arms and engage my core to slowly kind of work myself up here. And the longer I stay in saddle, usually the harder and longer it takes me to get out of saddle. And then slowly you can come up and out. Now your legs were deeply flexed in saddle, so a good counter pose, and you can do this too even if you did Sphinx at the Wall here, is to just stretch out the legs. And the easiest, most accessible way to do that is to just come to all fours and then just lengthen one out at a time. So straighten one leg, press the heel back to really lengthen through the back of that leg here. And then when you're done doing that for a while, straight out the other leg. And you can do little wiggles with the leg here just to work out the kinks in the sensation there. And then once you've done all of that, you can do other things too. You can do downward facing dog. Maybe I'll skip downward facing dog this time, but it's a good yang stretch to lengthen out the backs of the legs. So a little bit of free form yoga. And then the next yin posture is frog pose. So full frog here. So I'll introduce the posture, the regular posture frog, and then I will, if frog is too much, then the option is baby frog. And I'll just demonstrate baby frog after I get done with frog here. So you notice I've got a blanket spread out on top of my yoga mat, and that's to create extra padding under pressure points that are often developed during frog pose. So for frog pose, you come to hands and knees, and from hands and knees you start widening your knees apart, keeping the shins parallel to each other until you can't go anymore. You're finding your own personal stopping point. Maybe your feet are pointed back, maybe they're flexed and pointed to the side. You're finding which one is more careful. The emphasis, of course, is the opening of the inner hips here in frog pose. So you go as far as you go, and then you can stay on forearms like I'm doing. You can come down on straight arms, you can come out onto forearms. This is maybe where most people end up. If you have the yoga bolster though, this is a nice place to put the yoga bolster so you have support for your arms and your upper body. And then you can focus just simply what's going on in your hips, which is of course the emphasis of the posture. And then once you've settled here, we'll just stay here. Again, we're staying here for a little bit longer than normal holds in these practices that I've been doing. So for about 4 minutes here. So this is a good place to stay. Remember, we're not going for pain. We're not going for trauma. We're not going for desperation here. We're going for some sensation somewhere and then noticing that, focusing on it. If normal frog is too intense, then my recommendation is come into baby frog. Baby frog is basically wide-legged child's pose. So bring the shins back in. Maybe you have to bring the knees in a little bit closer. And then maybe you have to sink the hips back towards the heels. Reset yourself and sink yourself forward. And this is maybe enough of a hip opener for you that there's no need to do full frog. So go ahead and reset. Either into baby frog or maybe full frog. So maybe for a lot of us this is intense enough, and so we stay right here, and we're kind of glad we've got the bolster here. Don't need a bolster, you can just hang out on your forearms too. This is a long time. This kind of gets achy on your shoulders for some of us to just hang out here on our forearms. For some of you, you might be able to just lower yourself all the way down onto the floor here. This is kind of what I end up normally doing when I practice frog here, because now my upper body's resting on the floor. I don't have to worry about it getting too achy here. This might not be possible for some people, so you can try this. For those of you who are ultra flexible, so the extreme version of frog pose is side splits. So if you can actually straighten your legs out into side splits so that you actually feel something. Like maybe you're in frog, your hips are all the way down to the floor and you're feeling nothing, like you could take a nap there. Then if you're wanting something a little bit more extreme so that you actually feel something, then you can do the what's called the frog splits, basically. But for most of us mere mortals that have kind of a typical range of motion, this is where I'm at, is probably the farthest most of us can go here. So again, we have a little bit more than a minute left in this posture. And again, if things are getting too achy, there's no rule or condition that you have to stay in a posture. You're trying to stay in it for as long as is reasonable and healthy for you. And that might not be the full time range that I'm suggesting in this practice. And the length times that I'm holding postures are just suggestions here that you can try. And maybe challenge yourself as long as you're not harming yourself. It's not as long as you're not creating injury, pain, or trauma here. So we have about 6 more breaths here in frog. If this is feeling appropriate for you. Again, you get to decide whether you want to challenge yourself and stay a little longer, or if it's a better idea to come out. And it's okay to come out. It's what I call advanced yoga. When you know your body well enough that you know that's a good time to come out of the posture here. So I have a little bit different definition of what beginner yoga means and what advanced yoga means compared to a lot of other people here. Advanced yoga doesn't necessarily mean you can do an advanced posture, and vice versa. So one more breath here in frog pose. And then slowly come out of frog. I find the most accessible way is to just, if you're in full frog, is to just release your torso forward and then maybe lengthen and bring your legs back in. And you can do a little bit of a windshield wiper move or some kind of gentle movement to work out the pressure that developed in your knees, in your ankles, in your hips, in your inner thighs here, just to recover and recuperate from frog. And then when you're ready, next posture is Dragonfly at the Wall. Now the option for Dragonfly at the Wall will be just regular seated dragonfly pose. And maybe I'll demonstrate that first. And I'll use this bolster to sit on because I like a little bit of height. So regular seated dragonfly is just seated, legs out in front. Legs go wide as they go for you. And there can be little micro bends in the knees, or maybe even major bends in the knees here. The emphasis of this practice is to kind of work the tissue surrounding the hips, the low back being kind of a part of the hip area here. And so normally in Dragonfly we add a forward fold, but you don't have to. You can just stay here with a nice neutral spine. Marinate through the sensation. Notice the sensations you might feel running through your legs if you have a lot of tightness for your legs here. Otherwise, we'll try Dragonfly at the Wall, which is a little bit more yin-like, more supported here. And sometimes you can use a bolster under your hips when you sit at the wall. I'm going to demonstrate it this time in this practice without any bolsters, just to show you can do it whatever way fits your body. Some kind of support underneath your hips, or maybe no support. I'm going to have some soft padding, but not a layer of height underneath me. So you'll sit sideways at the wall, and then you'll come up into legs up the wall first. This takes you might take a few tries to get up here and legs up the wall. Spine is nice and neutral on the floor, so you can have padding underneath your torso for comfort. You can have a pillow underneath your head if you want to. And then slowly just allow your legs to go wide as far as they go until they stop for you. So no matter what the angle is, again, if you're a ballerina, maybe your legs are lying on the floor. Maybe your legs are not as wide as mine. Doesn't matter what the posture looks like. You're going to your feeling stopping point, whatever those feeling tones are here. And then soften, settle here. Maybe this is too painful for you, and maybe seated dragonfly seems to be a better option for you. So the wise yogi thing to do is to come out of this and then try a different variation. Try just seated dragonfly here. Maybe this feels better, and it's like, oh, I'm going to do this instead of seated dragonfly. Right? This is how you figure out your optimal practice here, is just by experimenting. And then settle here, like I said. So again, most of the sensation I actually feel in this posture are running through the bottoms of my legs. Now this is just typical for me because I'm someone that has just a lot of tightness in the fascia and the ligaments and the tissues that run through the back of my leg here. And maybe that doesn't seem logical that I'm calling this a low back practice, but it is all connected to the hips and to the low back. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of working on other tissues that put pressure on the tissues that run through my low back. And this, for some of us, will create a sense of release and opening in the low back, even though we're kind of feeling a lot of sensations in the legs. Not all of us. Some of us are actually feeling some of these poses in the low back, like saddle. Some of you will feel saddle in the low back. Some of you will feel frog pose in different parts of the hips. And because we're all diverse and unique, where we actually feel it can be differences, because our tightnesses are in different areas of the body here. So we're halfway through. We've been here for a couple minutes. Evaluate your edge here. So notice if this is a good place to stay for another couple minutes, or give yourself permission to come out. Again, that's the sign of an advanced yogi, is when you can notice and evaluate your internal landscape. And only you can do this. An external instructor like me can't do this, can't see what's really going on in your body unless I run up to you with an x-ray machine and take an x-ray. And well, that's just not going to happen in a typical yoga class or a yoga practice. So it's up to you to experiment and get to know your own inner sensations. This is essentially the point to any kind of yoga practice. Just yin is to take some time to breathe, get to know your own breath. Your breath is your breath, part of you. Get to know your circulation, get to know the nature of how your thoughts kind of move in and out of your brain. That's kind of the point to a lot of meditation and mindfulness, is, get to know another part of your body, which is this big piece of gray matter up here in the head here. That's important, along with the other physical aspects of this practice. So about 4 more breaths, 4 more long, slow yoga breaths here. So if your breath is not slow, then probably a little bit more than 4 breaths here. And then when you're ready, slowly bring your legs back up to center. You can do one leg at a time, and you can even use your hands. So again, moving slowly after a long held posture is a nice thing here. And then slowly, deliberately roll over to one side. You're allowed to stay here for a breath or two. to just get your orientation here, and then slowly bring yourself up. That's the long yin postures. We'll end practice with one tiny little integration move, and that's a supine twist here. So at some point, make your way onto your back with some floor space around you. Bend your knees, draw your knees into your torso, give your knees a hug. And then lower your knees over to one side. Allow the opposite shoulder to drift back down towards the floor so that you know you're in a spinal twist. Arms can come out into a T or cactus arm position. And if it's okay for your neck, you can turn your neck and look away from your knees over that other arm here. And just stay here for, well, couple breaths. So maybe one more breath here. And then maybe on an inhale, use the inhale to bring the knees back up to center. We'll go over to the other side. So exhale and slowly lower the knees over to the other side. Head can stay neutral if it needs to, or you can turn your head slowly to the opposite side from the knees again. Couple breaths here. Can notice if there's any kind of kinks. Send your breath there. And then bring your knees back up to center. Give your knees a nice hug. Roll all the way over to one side. Maybe pause for a moment. Notice the reverberations of this shorter practice. Then slowly bring yourself up. Come to seated. Find a stable seat. Notice your breath in your inner ground. Bring your hands together at heart center. And just remember that the universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. Namaste.